The carriage wheels churned through mud and the increasingly heavy downpour, each revolution a protest against the wild, untamed landscape that consumed the last vestiges of twilight. Elara pressed her gloved hand against the cold glass, peering out at the blur of ancient trees and mist-shrouded hills. Far below, the sea roared, a constant primal rhythm against the cliffs. This was not the gentle countryside of her youth, but a place of raw, elemental beauty, a fitting antechamber to the legend she had come to find. She had received the invitation weeks ago, a crisp, formal letter on thick, cream-colored paper, sealed with an elaborate wax crest she didn't recognize. It spoke of a rare collection, a unique artistic challenge, and an offer she couldn't refuse, an escape from the stifling expectations of London, a chance to breathe life into her dormant senses. The sender, a reclusive collector named Rhys Kincaid, was as mysterious as the isolated estate he inhabited, Blackwood Manor. A sudden lurch of the carriage threw her forward, and she caught herself, her heart thrumming. The driver, a gruff, silent man, had only grunted in response to her questions, confirming only that the road was treacherous and the journey long. Now, as the rain intensified, drumming a frantic cadence on the roof, she felt a thrill, a shiver that was both from the cold and from something deeper, more thrilling. Finally, through the swirling curtain of rain, a silhouette emerged against the indigo sky. Blackwood Manor. It was less a house and more a fortress, a sprawling edifice of dark stone, its gabled roofs and turrets battling the storm like a defiant king. A few windows glowed with a warm, inviting light, beacons in the encroaching gloom. The carriage slowed, turning up a long, winding drive flanked by impossibly tall skeletal trees that clawed at the sky. The heavy oak doors of the manor swung open before the carriage had even come to a full stop, revealing a rectangle of buttery yellow light and the figure of a man. He stood framed in the archway, a silent sentinel, his presence commanding even from a distance. As the driver helped her disembark, battling the wind that tried to rip her cloak from her shoulders, Elara's gaze was drawn irrevocably to him. He was tall, impossibly so, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway. His dark hair, the color of midnight, was swept back from a high forehead, and even in the dim light she could discern the sharp planes of his cheekbones, the strong line of his jaw. He wore a dark, tailored jacket that emphasized his powerful build, and a crisp white shirt, unbuttoned just enough to hint at the sculpted column of his throat. There was an elegance to his bearing, a quiet power that resonated through the stormy air. He descended the shallow steps, his movements fluid and unhurried, even as the wind whipped at his clothes. As he drew closer, Elara could finally make out his eyes. They were a startling shade, like molten gold or amber, luminous against the darkness of his features. They held a depth, a quiet intensity that seemed to pierce through the rain, through her own carefully constructed composure, and directly into something vulnerable within her. Miss Elara Vance, his voice was a low timbre, rich and resonant, carrying effortlessly over the wind and rain. It was like the deep thrum of a cello string, imbued with an unexpected warmth that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "Welcome to Blackwood, Mr. Kincaid," she replied, her voice a little breathless as she fought to keep her balance against a particularly strong gust. She extended a gloved hand and he took it. His touch was firm, warm, and unexpectedly gentle. His fingers were long and strong, encompassing hers completely. A spark, a tiny electric current, arced between them, making her breath catch. He held her gaze for a beat too long, and in those golden depths, she saw a flicker of something she couldn't quite name: recognition? Curiosity? Or perhaps a reflection of the same sudden, unsettling awareness that had just bloomed within her. "The journey was arduous, I imagine," he said, his thumb brushing lightly, almost imperceptibly, against the back of her hand before he released her. "Come inside, you must be chilled to the bone." He gestured with a graceful sweep of his hand, inviting her into the warmth. As she stepped across the threshold, the world outside, with its raging tempest, seemed to fall away. The air inside was thick with the scent of old wood, beeswax, and a faint, indefinable aroma of something wild and earthy, perhaps a distant peat fire. The great hall was breathtaking. A vast space, with a soaring vaulted ceiling, it was dimly lit by the flickering flames of a colossal fireplace where logs crackled merrily. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes and mythical creatures adorned the stone walls, their colors softened by age. A grand staircase, carved from dark, gleaming wood, swept upwards into the shadows. "Allow me to take your cloak," Rhys said, his voice closer now, making the fine hairs on her neck stand on end. She turned and he was there, closer than she had anticipated. As he reached for the heavy velvet of her travel cloak, his fingers brushed her shoulder. A fleeting contact that felt like a brand. His proximity was intoxicating, a heady mix of warm spices and something uniquely masculine. He moved with an effortless grace that belied his imposing stature, and as he unfastened the clasp, she felt the subtle pull of her hair, the light pressure of his knuckles against her collarbone. The air between them hummed. When the cloak was removed, she stood before him in a dress of deep forest green silk, its simple cut emphasizing her slender frame. She felt suddenly exposed, acutely aware of the way the fabric clung to her curves, of the rapid flutter of her pulse. "Much better," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering for a moment on her face, then her throat, before meeting her eyes again. There was no impropriety in his look, only an intense, discerning appraisal that made her feel utterly seen, utterly vulnerable. "Thank you," she managed, her voice a little reedy. She clasped her hands together, a nervous habit. "The manner is magnificent." A faint smile touched his lips, transforming his austere features into something breathtakingly handsome. "It has its charms. Come, let me show you to your chambers. You'll want to refresh yourself before dinner." He led her through a series of grand silent corridors, their footsteps echoing softly on the polished stone floors. The walls were lined with portraits, stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow them, and landscapes that pulsed with the same wild energy as the land outside. Every detail spoke of history, of secrets whispered through generations. Her room was a sanctuary, a spacious chamber, with a large four-poster bed draped in deep crimson velvet. A roaring fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows across the walls, illuminating a comfortable armchair, a writing desk, and a large window overlooking a formal garden, now a dark, rain-swept expanse. A delicate scent of lavender and old roses permeated the air. "I trust this will be to your liking," Rhys said, standing just inside the doorway, his presence filling the room without being overwhelming. Elara walked further in, drawn to the window. "It's perfect, more than I could have imagined." She turned back to him, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Kincaid." "Rhys, please," he corrected softly, his golden eyes holding hers. "And I hope you find the inspiration you seek here, Elara." He pronounced her name with a lingering softness that made it sound like a caress. "I hope so too," she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. She found herself suddenly shy, acutely aware of the intimacy of the moment, alone with him in the quiet warmth of the room. He inclined his head slightly. "Dinner will be served in an hour. Feel free to ring if you require anything." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her one last time, a silent promise in his eyes, before he turned and melted back into the shadows of the corridor. Alone, Elara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She walked to the large mullioned window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. The storm still raged, but inside, a different kind of storm had begun to brew. Rhys Kincaid was unlike any man she had ever met. He exuded an aura of ancient power, an almost predatory grace, yet there was a deep well of something gentle, something profoundly knowing in his eyes. She unpacked slowly, her thoughts consumed by him. Her fingers traced the rich velvet of her gown, the coolness of the silk. She chose a simple, elegant dress of midnight blue, a color that she hoped would reflect the mysterious allure of the manor, and perhaps a little of her own burgeoning desire. She brushed her long dark hair until it gleamed, letting it fall freely around her shoulders. She applied a touch of rose-scented lotion to her skin, a small indulgence, an unconscious preparation. When she descended the grand staircase an hour later, the silence of the manor seemed to amplify the beating of her heart. The great hall was empty, but a soft glow emanated from a doorway to the left. She followed the light, finding herself in a magnificent dining room. A long, polished mahogany table gleamed under the soft light of a crystal chandelier. The air was filled with the tantalizing aroma of roasted meat and herbs. Rhys was already there, standing by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had changed into a dark velvet smoking jacket that only enhanced his aura of sophisticated sensuality. The fabric seemed to absorb the firelight, giving him an almost ethereal glow. He turned as she entered, his gaze sweeping over her, and this time the appreciation in his eyes was undeniable. "You look exquisite, Elara. The blue suits you. And you, Rhys, look formidable," she returned, a small smile playing on her lips. She felt a surge of confidence under his approving gaze. He offered her a glass of wine, a deep ruby red that shimmered in the low light. "A local vintage. I hope you approve." She took a sip. It was rich, complex, with notes of dark fruit and earth, just like the land outside. "It's wonderful." They moved to the table, and a silent housemaid, seemingly appearing from the shadows, served them. The meal was a feast. Roasted pheasant with wild mushrooms, delicate seasonal vegetables, and a rich, decadent sauce. The conversation flowed easily, surprisingly so for two strangers meeting under such unusual circumstances. He asked about her work, her inspirations, her life in London. She found herself speaking with an openness she rarely afforded others, drawn out by his quiet attentiveness, the way his golden eyes seemed to absorb every word, every nuance of her expression. She spoke of her struggle to find a muse, of feeling stifled by the conventions of the art world, of her yearning for a deeper connection, a more profound truth in her creations. "And you, Rhys?" she asked, emboldened by the wine in his presence. "What draws you to art, to collecting?" He took a slow sip of his wine, his gaze contemplative. "Art for me is a mirror. It reflects not just the artist's soul, but the universal longings of humanity. I seek out pieces that whisper secrets, that hold a piece of the infinite." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low, intimate tone. "And your work, Elara, possesses that whisper, a profound understanding of the unspoken." Her cheeks flushed at his praise, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the wine or the fire. "That means a great deal coming from you." "I rarely flatter," he said, a corner of his mouth tilting in a subtle, enigmatic smile. "Only state the truth as I perceive it." The truth. His truth felt like a dangerous, alluring thing. They spoke of the history of the manor, of its ancient legends, and the wild beauty of the surrounding landscape. He described the rugged coastline, the hidden coves, the ancient standing stones that dotted the hills, imbuing each detail with a sense of poetic mysticism. He spoke of the land as if it were a living entity, a part of himself. "It is a place of powerful energies," he said, his eyes darkening with an intensity that sent a fresh shiver down her spine. "It demands respect, and it offers much in return." As the evening wore on, the storm outside seemed to subside, leaving only the soft drumming of residual rain against the windows and the distant roar of the ocean. The air in the dining room grew warmer, heavier, charged with an unspoken current between them. Elara found herself watching his mouth as he spoke, the way his lips curved, the subtle movements of his throat as he swallowed. She imagined the feel of his hand, the brush of his skin against hers, the taste of the wine on his lips. Dessert arrived, a delicate, dark chocolate torte, rich and bittersweet. As she reached for her fork, her fingers brushed against his, a fleeting electric contact that made them both pause. Their eyes met, and in that shared glance, a world of unspoken desire bloomed. The air thickened, charged with a palpable tension. "The night grows late," Rhys said, his voice a little rougher now, his gaze still locked with hers. "Perhaps a final drink by the fire?" Elara nodded, unable to speak, her throat suddenly dry. They moved to a smaller, more intimate drawing room adjacent to the dining hall. The fire here was smaller, casting a warm, flickering glow on deep leather armchairs and walls lined with ancient books. The room smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and a faint, sweet scent of dried flowers. Rhys poured them each a digestive, a dark, aromatic brandy. He handed her the snifter, his fingers brushing hers again, a deliberate, slow contact this time. The warmth of the glass radiated into her palm, mirroring the warmth that spread through her veins. She settled into a deep armchair, the soft leather molding to her form. Rhys took the armchair opposite, leaning back, his long legs stretched out towards the fire. The flames danced in his golden eyes, making them gleam with an almost feral intensity. The silence that descended upon them was not awkward, but heavy with unspoken desires, a rich, sensual quietude. Elara watched him, fascinated. The way the firelight sculpted the planes of his face, the slow, deliberate way he raised the snifter to his lips, the powerful elegance of his form. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, yet imbued with an underlying strength that was almost overwhelming. She felt a pull towards him, a deep magnetic force that defied logic. She had come here seeking inspiration for her art, and instead, she had found a man who was himself a masterpiece of raw power and refined beauty. "You are very quiet, Elara," he murmured, his voice a low caress in the stillness. She met his gaze, feeling the blush rise again. "I'm simply taking it all in. This place. And you." She saw the corner of his lip twitch, a hint of a smile. "It's a lot to absorb." "Indeed," he agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Blackwood has a way of revealing itself slowly, layer by layer, and some things are meant to be savored." His words hung in the air, laden with a double meaning that made her heart pound. She felt an irresistible urge to reach out, to touch the velvet of his jacket, to trace the line of his jaw. The longing was a physical ache, deep in her belly. He shifted in his chair, leaning forward slightly, his gaze dropping to her lips. "I sense a deep well of passion within you, Elara, a fire that yearns to be unleashed." Her breath hitched. He saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one ever had. Her carefully constructed facades felt transparent under his intense gaze. "Perhaps," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Perhaps I've just been waiting for the right spark." A slow smile spread across his face, a smile that was both tender and incredibly potent. "Then let us see, Elara," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, sending delicious shivers down her spine. "Let us see what fires we might ignite together in the heart of Blackwood." He rose from his chair, moving with the silent grace of a predator. He walked towards her, and Elara found herself unable to move, held captive by his golden gaze, by the sheer force of his presence. He stopped before her armchair, his tall form casting a long shadow over her. The scent of him, warm spices and something wild, enveloped her. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from her face, then gently, oh so gently, he tucked a stray strand of her dark hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, a touch so light it was almost ethereal, yet it sent a jolt of pure electricity through her. Her skin tingled, burning where he had touched. Her eyes fluttered closed for a moment, savoring the exquisite sensation, the promise in his touch. When she opened them, his face was close, his golden eyes filled with an intensity that stole her breath. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, hear the soft rhythm of his breath. "Good night, Elara," he murmured, his voice a silken thread, his thumb now gently caressing the curve of her jaw, sending tremors through her. "Sleep well." And then, he was gone, leaving her alone in the flickering firelight, her body humming with a desperate, beautiful ache, her heart echoing with the promise of velvet rapture. She knew, with absolute certainty, that sleep would be a long time coming tonight. She knew, with absolute certainty, that sleep would be a long time coming tonight. The fire, which had been a warm, comforting presence, now seemed to mock her with its dwindling embers, each crackle a sharp reminder of the sudden silence that had descended. Elara lay motionless, her body a taut string humming with the echo of his touch. His thumb on her jaw, the brush of his lips against her hair, the deep resonance of his voice, the heat of his body, every sensation was meticulously etched into her mind, replaying with vivid, agonizing clarity. She closed her eyes, but the darkness behind her lids offered no respite, only intensified the internal cinema of their encounter. A desperate, beautiful ache. The words resonated in her chest, a primal thrumming that had nothing to do with her heart, and everything to do with a deeper, more elemental core. It was a longing that tranced she'd ever known, a hunger that seemed to have been lying dormant within her, waiting for him to awaken it. Reese. Even his name was a caress, a whisper of untold power and tender promise. She tossed, the silk sheets tangling around her legs, a poor substitute for the warmth she craved. Her skin felt hypersensitive, every brush of fabric against it, a phantom touch, every rustle of the fire a whisper of his breath. She pushed herself up, needing to move, to dispel this restless energy that coursed through her veins like liquid fire. Her bare feet met the cool stone floor, a grounding sensation that did little to calm the tempest within. She walked to the large window, pulling aside the heavy velvet drapes. Outside, the night was a canvas of deep indigo, studded with a million indifferent stars. A sliver of moon hung like a silver sickle, casting a ghostly glow over the ancient trees that ringed the estate. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the rich, smoky warmth of her chambers. She rested her forehead against the cool glass, exhaling slowly, watching her breath mist on the pane. What was this spell he had woven around her? It felt less like a seduction and more like a revelation, as if he had peeled back layers of herself she hadn't even known existed, exposing a raw, vibrant core. Velvet rapture. The phrase lingered, heavy with unspoken meaning, promising a depth of experience that both thrilled and terrified her. Was this her destiny? To be consumed by this man, by this exquisite, burgeoning desire? Hours passed in a hazy blur of restless contemplation. The stars shifted, the moon dipped lower, and finally, the first faint blush of dawn began to paint the eastern sky. Only then, exhausted by the sheer intensity of her thoughts and desires, did Elara finally allow herself to sink back into the bed, her body still humming, her mind buzzing, but now with the fragile promise of sleep. Even as her eyelids grew heavy, the scent of him, a faint, woodsy spice, seemed to cling to her sheets, a lingering phantom that promised to haunt her dreams. Ringe. The sun, when it finally pierced through the heavy drapes, felt like a rude awakening. Elara blinked, her eyes gritty, her limbs heavy. She had slept, but it felt more like a brief surrender than true rest. The events of the previous night were not a dream, but a potent, vivid memory that pulsed behind her eyes. She rose, stretching luxuriously, her muscles protesting slightly. As she moved, she became acutely aware of her own body, a sensation that felt new and exhilarating. Every curve, every line, every inch of skin seemed to whisper with a heightened sensitivity, as if touched by a subtle magic. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown of soft forest green, its fabric flowing and light, designed to move with her, not restrict her. She braided her long dark hair, weaving in a few strands of fresh lavender from a small vase on her dressing table, hoping its calming scent might somehow soothe the lingering tension in her core. Breakfast was a quiet affair in the grand dining hall, though her appetite felt strangely dull. The servants moved silently, anticipating her every need, yet she barely registered their presence. Her gaze kept drifting to the empty seat at the head of the long oak table, the one she knew Reese usually occupied. He was not there. A pang of disappointment, sharp and unexpected, pierced through her. Had she imagined the intensity of their connection? Had his good night been merely a polite formality, not the profound statement her heart had interpreted it to be? Just as she was beginning to succumb to a wave of self-doubt, a shadow fell across the threshold. Elara's breath hitched. Reese stood there, framed by the archway, the morning light a halo around his dark form. He was dressed in riding leathers, the rich, worn material clinging to his powerful frame, emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his thighs. A faint sheen of sweat graced his temples, and his dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had just come from a vigorous ride. He looked wild, untamed, and utterly magnificent. Their eyes met across the vast expanse of the dining hall, and the air crackled with an unspoken current. It was as if the entire world outside their shared gaze ceased to exist. His lips curved into a slow, tantalizing smile, a private acknowledgement that sent a shiver tracing down Elara's spine. "Good morning, Elara," he said, his voice a low rumble that reached her even across the distance, carrying the same silken thread of the night before. "I trust you slept well?" The question, innocent on the surface, held a deeper meaning, a playful challenge that made her cheeks flush. She met his gaze, refusing to look away. "As well as could be expected, my lord," she replied, her voice steady despite the sudden racing of her pulse. He began to walk towards her, his stride confident and unhurried, each step echoing softly on the stone floor. Elara found herself unable to move, rooted to her seat, her senses entirely focused on his approach. The scent of him, fresh air, leather, and something uniquely Reese, grew stronger with every step. He stopped beside her chair, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from his body. He leaned in slightly, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. "I had an early ride," he explained, his voice softer now, meant for her ears alone. "The lands demand attention, even when one's mind is otherwise occupied." The implication hung tantalizingly in the air. His mind had been occupied with the ear. Her heart gave a sudden, joyous leap. "I understand," Elara managed, her voice a little breathy. She risked a glance at his strong, calloused hands, which rested casually on the back of her chair, inches from her hair. She imagined the feel of them, the strength, the tenderness they had shown just hours before. "Come," he said, straightening slightly, though his gaze remained fixed on hers. "Join me. I'm heading to the training grounds. There's a new recruit I wish to observe, and perhaps you might find it an interesting diversion." A diversion? She knew he meant more than that. It was an invitation, a chance to spend more time with him, to peel back another layer of the mystery that surrounded him. Elara nodded, pushing back her chair. "I'd be delighted, my lord." They walked together, side by side, through the castle's ancient corridors. The formality of his title felt almost ironic now, given the intimacy that vibrated between them. He did not touch her, but his presence was a tangible force, a silent conversation passing between them in the slight brush of their sleeves, the synchronized rhythm of their steps. The training grounds were a vast expanse of packed earth, surrounded by defensive walls. The air thrummed with the clang of steel, the shouts of men, and the rhythmic thump of practice weapons. Young men, some barely out of boyhood, others seasoned warriors, sparred and drilled under the watchful eyes of their instructors. It was a world of brute force and disciplined movement, a stark contrast to the quiet elegance of the castle's inner chambers. Reese led her to a shaded viewing platform, a small elevated area with a carved stone bench. "Forgive the dust and din," he said, his voice carrying easily over the commotion. "But it's important to see where the strength of the realm truly lies." Elara watched, fascinated. She had always lived a sheltered life, far removed from the harsh realities of warfare. Here, she saw raw power, dedication, and a fierce sense of camaraderie. Her gaze was drawn to Reese as he observed the men below. His posture was relaxed, yet every line of his body spoke of coiled power. His eyes, usually so intense when fixed on her, now scanned the field with a sharp, assessing gaze, missing nothing. He was a lord, a leader, and a warrior in his own right. This was another facet of him, one that only deepened her fascination. "See the way he holds his shield?" Reese murmured, leaning closer to point out a young man with fiery red hair. "Too high, too rigid. He relies on brute strength, not agility." His breath was warm on her ear, sending a delicious shiver down her arm. The scent of him, even stronger now, filled her senses. Elara found it difficult to focus on the training. Her awareness of him, so close, so powerfully masculine, overshadowed everything else. "He seems eager," she managed, her voice a little breathy. Rhys chuckled, a low, rich sound that resonated through her. "Eagerness is a fine quality, but it must be tempered with skill and with wisdom. A warrior must know when to strike and when to hold back, when to unleash his full force, and when to conserve his energy for the long game." His words, though ostensibly about warfare, felt like they held a double meaning, a subtle current flowing beneath the surface, hinting at the dance between them. Elara met his gaze, a silent question in her eyes. He held her gaze, his own dark and fathomless. "Life, Elara, is a series of battles and surrenders. The trick is knowing which to choose, and with whom." He paused, his eyes dropping briefly to her lips, then flicking back to her eyes, a silent challenge, a promise. A blush rose to her cheeks, a warmth spreading through her body. She understood. He was talking about them, about the intricate, dangerous game they were playing. They spent the better part of the morning at the training grounds. Rhys explained the nuances of swordplay, the strategy of formations, the importance of discipline. Elara listened, captivated not just by the information, but by the sheer passion in his voice when he spoke of his people. He was not just a powerful lord, but a dedicated protector, a man deeply invested in the welfare of his lands. As the sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the dusty ground, Rhys finally turned to her. "Enough of this for now," he said, his voice softer, drawing her attention back to him. "You must be weary of watching men sweat." A playful glint entered his eyes. Elara smiled. "It was illuminating, my lord." "Good," he said, rising. "Now, perhaps you would join me for a different kind of illumination?" He offered her his hand. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and utterly reassuring. The contact, though simple, sent a jolt through her, a familiar hum that resonated deep within her. He helped her down from the platform, his fingers lingering on hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary. He led her away from the noise and dust of the training grounds, past manicured gardens, and into a quieter, more secluded part of the castle grounds. This area was wilder, overgrown with ancient rose bushes whose blossoms were just beginning to burst forth, their heady perfume filling the air. A winding path, barely visible beneath a canopy of old oak trees, led them deeper into the shadows. "Where are we going?" Elara asked, her voice hushed, the secluded atmosphere adding to the sense of intimacy. "To a place I often seek solace," Rhys replied, his gaze warm and direct. "A place where the castle walls feel far away, and the world outside feels even further." The path opened into a small hidden glade. In its center stood a crumbling stone fountain, its basin now filled with moss and delicate ferns, but still retaining a quiet dignity. Overlooking the fountain was a massive, gnarled oak tree, its branches spreading wide like ancient arms. Beneath its shade, a stone bench was nestled, half hidden by climbing ivy. "It's beautiful," Elara whispered, truly enchanted. The air here was cooler, imbued with the scent of damp earth and verdant growth. It felt like a sacred place, a secret sanctuary. Rhys led her to the bench and gestured for her to sit. He settled beside her, close enough that their knees almost brushed, their shoulders nearly touching. The silence that fell between them was not awkward, but comfortable, imbued with a shared sense of peace and burgeoning intimacy. He leaned back against the rough bark of the oak, his eyes scanning the glade. "My mother used to bring me here," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, tinged with a hint of nostalgia. "She would tell me stories of the old world, of magic and forgotten gods." Elara watched him, captivated by this rare glimpse into his past, into his vulnerabilities. "Did you believe them?" He turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers, a faint, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. "I believe there is more to this world than what we can see, Elara, more than what we are told. And sometimes, those old stories hold kernels of truth, hidden beneath layers of myth. His gaze deepened, becoming more intense, as if he were looking not just at her, but into her. Have you ever felt it, Elara? That pull towards something ancient, something profound, something beyond human comprehension? Elara shivered, a delicious tremor that had nothing to do with the cool air. She thought of the desperate, beautiful ache from last night, the phrase, velvet rapture. It felt like a pull, indeed, a powerful, undeniable force drawing her towards him, towards something unknown yet utterly compelling. I think I'm beginning to, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Especially since I came here. He reached out, his hand slowly, deliberately raising to cup her cheek. His thumb traced the curve of her jaw, mirroring his action from the night before, sending the same electric current through her veins. His touch was both gentle and possessive, a silent claim. There are secrets hidden in these lands, Elara, he murmured, his voice a low, seductive rumble. And in us, secrets that yearn to be uncovered, to be unleashed. His gaze was fixed on her lips, then her eyes, a question, a plea, a promise. Do you fear them? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat. Fear? Yes, a little. But it was overshadowed by a fierce, undeniable curiosity, a longing that drowned out all apprehension. His touch was intoxicating, his proximity a potent spell. She wanted to lean into him, to feel the solid warmth of his body against hers, to taste the promise on his lips. No, she whispered, her voice barely audible. No, I don't fear them. Not with you. A flicker of something profound, almost ancient, passed through his eyes. A raw emotion that seemed to strip away the layers of his usual composure. He leaned closer, his scent enveloping her, intoxicating and irresistible. His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingering there, promising a kiss that would shatter her world. Her breath hitched in her throat, her lips parting slightly in anticipation. Every fiber of her being screamed for him, for his touch, for the exquisite oblivion she knew he could offer. The air between them thrummed with unspoken desires, with the weight of all that had passed and all that was yet to come. He paused, a breath away from her, his eyes still locked with hers, as if seeking her absolute consent, her undeniable desire. The tension was exquisite, a sweet torment that made her tremble. His thumb stroked her cheek once more, a feather-light touch, before his hand slid to the nape of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, gently urging her closer. Elara closed her eyes, surrendering to the inevitable, to the delicious pull of him. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, hear the soft rhythm of his breath mingling with her own. This was it. This was the moment she had been aching for, the culmination of all the longing and unspoken promises. But then, just as their lips were about to meet, a sudden, sharp cry echoed from the direction of the castle, followed by the urgent clang of a distant bell. The sound, unexpected and jarring, pierced the intimate bubble they had created, ripping them back to reality. Rhys froze, his body tensing instantly. His hand, still at the nape of her neck, tightened almost imperceptibly, a protective reflex. His eyes, which had been soft with desire, hardened, becoming sharp and alert, already assessing the distant alarm. He pulled back, reluctantly, his gaze still holding hers for a fleeting moment, filled with a deep regret, a silent apology. "Stay here, Elara," he commanded, his voice now crisp and authoritative, the lord and warrior reasserting himself. "Do not move." And then, with a swift, fluid motion, he was on his feet, leaving her alone on the stone bench, the scent of him still clinging to the air, the phantom touch of his lips still burning on hers. He disappeared into the shadows of the ancient trees, leaving her once again in the quiet solitude of the glade, her body still humming with unfulfilled anticipation, her heart echoing with the promise of what had almost been. The distant clang of the bell continued, a harsh reminder that their world, however magical, was still fraught with danger and interruption. Elara knew, with a sinking certainty, that the velvet rapture would have to wait. But for how long? And what new threat now demanded his attention? The distant clang of the bell continued, a harsh reminder that their world, however magical, was still fraught with danger and interruption. Elara knew with a sinking certainty that the velvet rapture would have to wait. But for how long? And what new threat now demanded his attention? A shiver, not entirely from the cool night air, traced its way down Elara's spine. The glade, which moments ago had thrummed with the intoxicating promise of shared skin and whispered secrets, now felt vast and empty, the lingering scent of Lysander's unique fragrance the only proof he had ever been there. His sudden disappearance had left a void, a sharp, aching absence that resonated deep within her. Her skin still tingled where his hands had been, the ghost of his lips a phantom pressure against her own, a cruel memory of the precipice from which she had been so abruptly pulled back. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to contain the tremors that shook her, half from cold, half from the sheer force of unspent desire. The world had tilted on its axis, leaving her marooned in a sea of longing. The ancient trees, once silent witnesses to their burgeoning intimacy, now seemed to mock her solitude with their impassive watch. The very air felt thin, stripped of the vibrant energy that Lysander's presence always brought. With a sigh that was more a mournful exhalation, Elara turned, her bare feet sinking into the soft moss. Her path, usually illuminated by the moon and the faint glow of forest spirits, now felt veiled in an oppressive gloom. She moved slowly, each step a reluctant departure from the hallowed ground where the most profound parts of herself had been laid bare, only to be left suspended. Her shift, barely clinging to her shoulders, felt like a flimsy shield against the encroaching chill, both physical and emotional. The journey back to her small, secluded cottage, at the edge of the deeper woods, was a blur of tangled thoughts and frustrated sighs. The cottage, usually a sanctuary of peace, seemed to hold little comfort tonight. It was a simple dwelling, crafted from ancient oak and stone, hidden from prying eyes by a veil of ivy and a protective circle of hawthorn. Inside, a small fire still glowed in the hearth, casting dancing shadows that seemed to magnify her loneliness. She moved with a heavy heart, shedding her damp shift and letting it fall to the floor in a heap, a tangible representation of her discarded hopes. Standing by the fire, its warmth doing little to thaw the ice around her heart, she ran a hand over her own skin, tracing the paths his fingers had taken, recording the intoxicating heat of his touch. Every nerve ending felt alive, hyper-aware, yet agonizingly unfulfilled. The velvet rapture, a name Lysander had whispered against her lips just before the bell, felt like a cruel jest, a mirage, shimmering just out of reach. This wasn't the first time their moments had been curtailed, though never so abruptly, never when they were so utterly poised on the brink. Lysander was a creature of duty, of shadows and secrets, his life woven into the very fabric of this ancient, hidden world. She knew he bore burdens, responsibilities that transcended the simple desires of a mortal heart, even hers. But tonight, the knowledge did little to soothe the raw edges of her longing. She remembered the first time he had appeared, a phantom in the twilight, emerging from the mist-shrouded forest like a dream made flesh. His eyes, the color of twilight and ancient secrets, had held hers captive from that very first moment. He was a being of contradictions, powerful yet gentle, fierce yet tender, his touch igniting a fire within her that she hadn't known existed. Their encounters had always been clandestine, stolen moments under the watchful eyes of the moon and stars, each meeting building an exquisite tension, a slow burn that promised an inferno. He had taught her to see the forest anew, to hear the whispers of the wind through the leaves, to feel the ancient pulse of the earth beneath her feet. He had awakened her senses, refined them, made her aware of the subtle energies that flowed through all living things. And in doing so, he had awakened a hunger within her, a primal yearning that only he seemed capable of satisfying. Their kisses had grown deeper, their touches more daring, each encounter a step closer to the inevitable surrender they both craved. Just last week, under a canopy of shimmering starlight, he had traced the line of her collarbone with a finger that felt like a brand, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered, "Soon, Elara, soon, the night will claim us fully." The memory sent a fresh wave of heat through her, a stark contrast to the cold reality of his absence. He had always been so careful, so deliberate in his approach, like a master sculptor unveiling a masterpiece. Each touch a revelation, each kiss a promise. But now, the masterpiece remained unfinished, the promise unfulfilled. She fetched a flask of spiced wine, its warmth a small comfort as she sat by the fire, her mind racing. What danger could be so pressing? The bell, she recognized, was the warning signal from the ancient watchtower on the northern ridge, a signal reserved for threats of significant magnitude. It wasn't the usual call to arms against rogue forest creatures or encroaching poachers. This was something deeper, something that threatened the delicate balance of their hidden world. Was it the shadow blight? A creeping corruption Lysander had once alluded to, that sought to drain the life force from the ancient trees? Or was it something more tangible, more human, yet equally insidious? Her thoughts drifted to the few times Lysander had been injured, returning to her cottage with silent wounds that spoke of fierce battles fought in the unseen realms of the forest. She would tend to him, her fingers tracing the tense lines of his muscles, the faint scars that crisscrossed his magnificent chest. During those times, the vulnerability in his eyes, however fleeting, had forged an even deeper bond between them. He allowed her to care for him, to be close, to witness the warrior beneath the serene exterior. The memory of his strong, lean body, the way his skin felt like warm silk beneath her fingertips, only intensified her current torment. She wished she could be there now, to offer what solace she could to bind his wounds, to simply be with him. Hours passed, marked only by the dwindling fire and the slow creep of dawn's first light through the cracks in the shutters. Elara remained restless, unable to find sleep, her senses straining for any sign of his return. The forest outside remained silent, an ominous quiet that spoke of either a resolved threat or a deep, ongoing struggle. The moon, once a luminous beacon, had long since set, leaving the world to the gradual brightening of the eastern sky. Just as the first true rays of sunlight began to pierce the canopy, painting the forest floor in dappled gold, a flicker of movement at her window caught her eye. Her heart leaped, a frantic bird against her ribs. She was on her feet in an instant, crossing the small room, her breath catching in her throat. He stood there, framed by the nascent light, his form etched in the doorway. But this was not the Lysander who had left her in a blaze of passion. His clothes were torn, streaks of mud and dark stains marring the rich fabric. A deep gash marred his left forearm, still seeping crimson, and his usually impeccable dark hair was disheveled, falling across a brow furrowed with exhaustion and concern. His eyes, though still holding that intense, captivating light, were shadowed with weariness, yet they burned with an almost feverish intensity as they met hers. "Lysander," she breathed. The name a prayer, a sigh of relief, and a question all at once. He stepped inside, the air around him crackling with a residual energy, a scent of damp earth, iron, and something wild, untamed. He moved with a slight stiffness, his usual effortless grace a little muted. Without a word, he closed the door behind him, plunging the cottage back into a softer, more intimate gloom. Elara was instantly at his side, her hands reaching for him, not in desire, but in pure, unadulterated worry. "What happened? You're hurt." Her fingers hovered over the gash on his arm, her brow furrowed with concern. He caught her hands, his grip firm despite his weariness, and brought them to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "It is over for now," he murmured, his voice rough, a little hoarse, but laced with a profound relief. "The shadow blight, it attempted to cross the ancient ward line. We pushed it back." He didn't elaborate, but the grim set of his jaw and the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes of the battle he had just fought. "Let me see to your arm," she insisted, gently pulling her hands free and leading him towards the small basin of water she kept for washing. She began to gather her herbs and clean cloths, her movements efficient and practiced. He watched her, a ghost of a smile touching his lips as she worked, her tenderness a balm to his weary soul. You should have been sleeping, Elara. How could I? She retorted, her voice tinged with exasperation, yet softened by concern. You left me in the middle of everything, and then that bell. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I always worry when you leave like that. He reached out, his uninjured hand cupping her cheek, his thumbs stroking her skin with exquisite tenderness. I know, little bird, forgive me. There was no time. His gaze deepened, a silent apology, and a promise mingling in their depths. But know this, not a moment of my thoughts was free of you, even in the thick of it. His words, a salve to her aching heart, brought a fresh wave of heat to her cheeks. She focused on cleaning his wound, her fingers gentle as she wiped away the dried blood and applied a poultice of comfrey and willow bark, binding it with strips of linen. The proximity, the scent of him, the quiet intimacy of the moment, began to slowly rekindle the embers of their thwarted passion. As she worked, she could feel the tension begin to ease from his body, replaced by a deep exhaustion. When she was finished, he sank onto the stool by the hearth, leaning his head back against the cool stone, his eyes closing for a moment. Elara knelt before him, her gaze tracing the lines of fatigue on his face, the faint stubble along his jaw. She longed to reach out, to smooth away the worry, to simply hold him. The need to comfort him was overwhelming, intertwining with her own unfulfilled desires. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze, and in their depths she saw not just weariness but an undeniable hunger, a mirroring of her own. I owe you a night, Elara, he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her, even without touch. A night where there are no bells, no threats, only us. Her heart quickened. You owe me more than a night, Lysander, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You owe me the velvet rapture. The words, once his, now tasted like forbidden fruit on her tongue. A slow, sensual smile spread across his lips, transforming his tired face into something breathtakingly alluring. And you shall have it, my fierce heart. But first, he reached out, taking her hand and drawing her closer until she was kneeling between his knees, her thighs brushing against his. The sudden contact sent a jolt of electricity through her. First, I need to feel human again, to shed the grime of battle, the stench of fear. The water is warm, she offered, her voice a little breathless, her eyes locked with his. She knew what he was asking, not just for a bath, but for her presence, her touch. He nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. Help me. The word, a rare admission from him, sent a thrill through her. She rose, her hands going to the fastenings of his tunic, her fingers trembling slightly as she began to unlace the leather ties. His eyes followed her every move, dark and intense, a silent promise in their depths. As the tunic parted, revealing the broad expanse of his chest, she saw more than just muscle and sinew. There were fresh bruises, dark blooms against his pale skin, a testament to the ferocity of the encounter. She helped him remove his torn garments, her fingers brushing against his heated skin, each touch a spark. His body, even in exhaustion, was magnificent, lean and powerful, scarred but beautiful. When he stood naked before her, he was a vision of masculine grace, his vulnerability making him even more compelling. The air in the small cottage thickened, charged with unspoken desires. He led the way to the small bathing room, where a wooden tub, already filled with steaming water and scented with dried lavender and rosemary, awaited. Elara had prepared it earlier, a quiet act of hope, a silent prayer for his return. He stepped into the tub, a soft sigh escaping his lips as the warm water enveloped him. She knelt beside him, taking up a soft sponge, her movements slow, deliberate. She began to wash him, her hands gentle as they moved over his shoulders, down his back, tracing the hard planes of his muscles. The steam rose around them, clinging to their skin, creating a dreamlike haze. He leaned his head back, his eyes closed, giving himself over to her ministrations. Her touch was tender, soothing, yet beneath it, a current of longing ran hot and strong. She washed his hair, her fingers massaging his scalp, working out the grime and tension. He groaned softly, a sound of pure contentment that sent a shiver through her. As she moved to his chest, her fingers gliding over the firm expanse, she felt the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. She traced the lines of his abs, the faint scars that spoke of a dangerous past, her touch light, almost reverent. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the lapping of water and the soft sound of their breathing. When she reached his injured arm, she was careful, her touch feather-light. He opened his eyes then, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You heal me, Elara," he whispered, his voice husky with emotion. "Not just my wounds, but my spirit." Her gaze met his, a blush creeping up her neck. "You do the same for me, Lysander," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "You awaken parts of me I never knew existed." He reached out, his good hand cupping the back of her head, drawing her closer. Her face was now inches from his, the scent of him, clean, musky, undeniably male, filling her senses. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat. His gaze dropped to her lips, linger there. A silent question. "May I?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, filled with a raw need that mirrored her own. She didn't answer with words, but with a slight nod, her eyes fluttering closed in anticipation. His lips met hers, softly at first, a tentative exploration, a reacquaintance. It was a kiss of profound tenderness, a silent apology for the interruption, a fervent promise for what was to come. Then, as if a dam had broken, the tenderness gave way to a deeper hunger, a desperate need that had been building between them for months. His kiss deepened, becoming more insistent, more passionate. His tongue traced the seam of her lips, asking for entry, and she parted them without hesitation, inviting him in. Their tongues met, danced, tangled. A sensual ballet of shared desire. Her hands, still holding the sponge, dropped to his shoulders, her fingers digging into his wet skin, as if to anchor herself in the rising storm. The kiss went on, consuming them, erasing the memory of the bell, the battle, the long hours of separation. It was a kiss of relief, of yearning, of unspoken vows. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathless, their eyes heavy-lidded, their bodies humming with a delicious ache. "I have missed you," he rasped, his forehead resting against hers. "Every moment." "And I you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. He pulled back slightly, his gaze sweeping over her face, lingering on her lips, her eyes, before dropping lower. "Come here," he commanded, his voice soft but firm, an invitation she couldn't refuse. Without hesitation, Elara shed her own shift, letting it fall to the floor. The air, cool against her skin, was quickly chased away by the heat radiating from Lysander, from the steam, and from the fire within her. She stepped into the tub, easing herself down into the warm water, her body pressing against his. A soft gasp escaped her lips as their wet skin met, the sensation exquisite, overwhelming. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, her back against his chest. His chin rested on her shoulder, his breath warm against her ear. Her own hands found his, intertwining their fingers, a silent declaration of their bond. The water swirled around them, a liquid embrace. She could feel every inch of him, the hard planes of his chest, the strong beat of his heart against her back, the lean power of his thighs beneath the water. The heat between them was palpable, a silent language spoken by their bodies. He began to trail kisses along the sensitive skin of her neck, down her shoulder, sending shivers through her. Her head fell back against his shoulder, exposing more of her throat, an unspoken invitation. His lips moved lower, past her collarbone to the swell of her breast, leaving a fiery trail in their wake. A soft moan escaped her. His hand, strong and calloused, moved from her waist, tracing the curve of her hip, then slowly, deliberately, between her legs, finding the soft, sensitive skin there. Her breath hitched. The touch, so gentle yet so knowing, sent a shockwave of pleasure through her. She arched into his touch, a silent plea for more. "Not yet," he whispered, his voice a low thrum against her ear, filled with a delicious anticipation. Not yet, my love. Let us simply be. For a while. Let the world outside fade away. And so they lingered, wrapped in each other's embrace, the water warm around them, the air thick with unspoken desires. His kisses continued to rain down upon her, light and teasing, igniting every nerve ending. His fingers continued their slow, intoxicating exploration, bringing her to the edge of sensation again and again, but never quite pushing her over. It was a delicious torment, a prolonged foreplay that promised an explosion of pleasure when the moment finally arrived. Elara melted into him, her body pliant, her mind lost in the swirling vortex of sensation. The weariness of the night, the worry for his safety, the frustration of their interrupted passion, all of it began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of peace and an escalating tide of desire. She knew with a certainty that resonated deep within her soul that no matter what dangers their world held, no matter how many times they were pulled apart, their bond would remain. But as the water began to cool, and the first rays of the true morning sun began to filter through the small window, casting a golden glow upon their entwined forms, the outside world began to reassert its presence. The memory of the bell, the lingering threat of the shadow blight, the unresolved mysteries of Lysander's life, they were still there, waiting. And the velvet rapture, though closer than ever, still hung in the balance, a breathtaking promise yet to be fully realized. Lysander's hand stilled its exquisite caress, and he held her close, his breathing deep and even, a moment of fragile peace before the world, with all its demands, would inevitably call again. His lips found the hollow of her throat, a soft, seeking brush that sent a shiver through her. "Not yet, my love," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her skin, a counterpoint to the distant clamor of the world that threatened to intrude. Not yet. His hand, which had stilled, began to move again, tracing a path inward, a deliberate, tender exploration that reignited the embers to a roaring flame. Any thought of bells or blight dissolved in the sudden potent rush of sensation. Lysander shifted, his body pressing closer still, an exquisite weight that anchored her to the present, to him. His kiss returned, deeper this time, no longer a question but a fervent declaration, his tongue tangling with hers in a dance of urgent desire. She arched into him, her fingers lacing through his soft, dark hair, pulling him closer still, as if to absorb him into her very being. The velvet rapture wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, delicious unraveling, each thread of tension loosening, each nerve ending singing until the entire tapestry of her being dissolved into a swirling vortex of pleasure. It was the taste of him, the scent of his skin, the rhythmic thud of their hearts beating in unison. It was a surrender, profound and absolute, where the boundaries between them blurred and then vanished entirely. Her breath hitched, a soft gasp escaping her lips as a wave crested, carrying her higher and higher until she broke on a shore of pure, unadulterated bliss. Lysander's own ragged breath mingled with hers, his body taut and trembling above her as he followed her into the shimmering depths. A low groan rumbled from his chest, a sound of pure masculine release, as if the very core of him had found its home. The world contracted to this single, perfect moment, a universe spun from shared ecstasy. Slowly, gently, the tide receded, leaving them intertwined, breathless and replete. The silence that followed was not empty, but rich with the echoes of their shared surrender, a profound peace settling over them like a soft, warm blanket. The shadow blight seemed a distant dream, the bell's chime a forgotten echo. Here, in the sanctuary of their entwined limbs, nothing else mattered. Lysander pressed a kiss to her temple, a silent promise hanging in the air, a future whispered in the quiet beat of their hearts. He held her close, a gentle protective embrace that spoke volumes. The world would indeed call again, with all its demands and mysteries, but now they would face it together, strengthened by the sweet, intoxicating memory of their velvet rapture, a secret garden they could always return to. For now, in the tender aftermath, they simply existed, lost in the tranquil beauty of their shared, profound peace.